source of light and sight in our perception. I started thinking about that when my father was struggling with his vision, trying to be able to read books and see things properly. He was struggling with that, and I thought about how really all of that comes from Christ. He appreciated the books that you all sent him from the library here. Thanks for doing that. So I want to talk about the what and the how I sow this seed in Guatemala, radio programs, literature distribution, work I do with schools and believers I meet with on Sundays, and then share some prayer requests, and then leave you with a word of encouragement about letting your light shine before men. There it went. Yeah. Okay, I'll just do that. So just a little bit about Guatemala. Guatemala is just south of Mexico. You can see on the slide on the left there where it's located. I work in the department of Quetzaltenango mostly, and next department over Totonicapan, which is shown in red there. Live in the city of Quetzaltenango, which is the second city of the country. It's a fairly large city with a couple 100,000 people in the city proper, and I've read as much as 750,000 in the metropolitan area, so it's really grown since I grew up there as a child. Next slide. No worries. There's a lot of volcanoes in Guatemala. Quetzaltenango's at 8,000 feet in a valley surrounded by mountains. I can see this volcano out of my apartment window, and there's an active volcano behind it that erupts regularly. You can see in the upper right, and then on the lower right is another volcano with a small lake in the crater of it. A lot of picturesque things in Guatemala. Go ahead. And there's a lot of Mayan ruins that you can see in these pictures. Go ahead. More about the people of Guatemala. There's just under 18 million people in Guatemala, and 42% of them are Mayan, which is about 7.5 million, and 11% are Quiche, which comes out to about 1.9 million. I mostly work in the Quiche language. And there's a lot of Guatemalans living in the U.S. There's 1.8 million Guatemalans in the U.S. And if they have the same, I didn't find any information on what percentage or how many Mayan or Quiche people there are in the U.S., but if they're similar to the percentages in Guatemala, thered be probably 750,000 Mayan-speaking people in the U.S. and 198,000 Quiche-speaking people. I have resources online. I have hymns in Quiche online that are available that are really very popular with the Quiche-speaking people here. So I look for ways to reach out to the people who have immigrated as well. And in comparison, there's 400,000 Navajos in the U.S., so there's probably more Mayan people than there are Navajo people in the U.S., so it's a big mission field, and I think a lot of them miss their culture, their native language, and they're open to looking for resources online, so I do my best to take advantage of that. Next slide. So getting back to going to Christ being source of light, we know Christ created all things, and of course that would include light. So John 8:12 says, "Then Jesus spoke again to them, saying, I am the light of the world. He who follows me will not walk in the darkness, but will have the light of life." So light comes from Christ, and we know our sight comes from Christ. Christ healed the blind people and we also, through God, we have understanding or perception. And I tend to think of these things from a technical point of view because I have an electrical engineering background and worked in that field for many years. And because of that, it just gives me a lot of appreciation for all the complexities of not just the physical nature of light, but also how our body works, how we're able to see and also perceive and understand. Next slide. John 1:1-5 says, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. All things came into being through him, and apart from him, not even one thing came into being that has come into being. In him was life, and the life was the light of mankind. And the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness did not grasp it." So the light is there, whether we grasp it or understand it or want to think about it or not, but it's available for each and every one of us. And we see light as white light, but we know God really made light in many colors, and we perceive it as white when they're in similar amounts, like you can see with the prism or with the rainbow, that God gave us a symbol after the flood, say he would never flood the whole earth again. So God has used that as a way to speak. Next slide. Next slide. And Christ gave us our sight, and he's also the healer of the blind. And they came to Bethsaida, and they brought a blind man to Jesus and implored him to touch him. Taking the blind man by the hand, he brought him out of the village, and after spitting in his eyes and laying his hands on him, he asked, "Do you see anything?" And he looked up and said, "I see men, for I see them like trees walking around." Then again he laid his hands on his eyes, and he looked intently and was restored and began to see everything clearly. So we know the eye has the cornea, the lens, and it's got the rods and the cones and for different colors, for red, green, and blue, and then the rods for seeing nighttime. And we, according to how much of those different sensors, you could call them, in our eyes are excited, is what we see and what we interpret. And reading this verse makes me wonder, what was the process? Did he have corneas, and were the corneas corrected? And then was there a problem with the optical nerve? Or, we don't really know why it was a two-step process. But I was talking to someone about it, and they said, well, the important thing about this is Christ knew what the man needed emotionally. Perhaps the man was not ready to be healed just all at once in 1 second. Perhaps he needed time to adjust. God knows exactly what we need. Next slide. Psalms 18:28 says, For you light my lamp. The Lord my God illumines my darkness." And this just shows some diagrams of what is actually in the eye, of how that happens. God did this physically, but there's also a spiritual aspect to it. Next slide. Mark 4:10-12. As soon as he was alone, his followers, along with the 12 disciples, began asking him about the parables. And he was saying to them, "To you has been given the mystery of the kingdom of God. But for those who are outside, everything comes in parables, so that while seeing they may see and not perceive, and while hearing they may hear and not understand. Otherwise they might return, and it would be forgiven them." So understanding comes from God. This diagram is showing the scientists have tried to understand what different parts of the brain do what processing of the vision to understand what it is that you're seeing. There's different diagrams there, two different theories. We're trying to understand how the intricacies of the mind work. And we don't know exactly how that works. I don't think we ever will, but we are able to get a little glimpse of it. And to me, reading those things just makes me more appreciative and just more think about just the wonders of what God has done in creation and in our bodies and through the Word and just the depth of the Word of God. Next slide. So Christ spoke through parables. In Mark 4:13 through 20, and he said to them, "Do you not understand this parable? How will you understand all the parables? The sower sows the seed." Next slide. And then he goes into the parable and explains it. These are the ones who are beside the road where the word is sown and where they hear. Immediately Satan comes and takes away the word which has been sown in them. And in a similar way, these are the ones sown with seed on the rocky places, who, when they hear the word, immediately receive it with joy, and yet they have no firm root in themselves, but are only temporarily. Then, when affliction or persecution occurs because of the word, immediately they fall away. And others are the ones sown with seed among the thorns. These are the ones who have heard the word, but the worries of the world and the deceitfulness of wealth and the desires for other things enter and choke out the word, and it becomes unfruitful. And these are the ones sown with seed on the good soil, and they hear the word and accept it and bear fruit 30, 60, and 100 times as much. So that's a parable of the seed, and our responsibility is to sow the seed, and sometimes it's received, sometimes it's not received. Sometimes it's received and it's much later when we hear about it, or we may never in this life know that it was received, but it's our responsibility to sow the seed. And I've been encouraged several times lately by people who have approached me. There were a lot of road construction, and I ended up having to walk a fair distance to go meet on Sundays, and it was really a blessing in disguise because of people that approached me. One family approached me, and I ended up seeing their son again, which he invited me to lunch. I had not seen him since I was in college, and he told me that my dad had him take Emmaus courses, and in 1996 he accepted the Lord as a measure of that. And I talked to my dad, and he didn't really know that whole history. And just 3 Sundays ago, I parked my car and walked the last little bit down to where we meet, because it's a very narrow road in front of their house, and if I park there, often I have to go out and move the car when a big truck comes by. So I've started parking further away to not be interrupted. And this lady flagged me down, and she was waving to me from across the road, and I was just wanting to get back home, and I'm thinking, oh, she must want a ride or something. But I went over and talked to her, and she asked me who I was and said, yeah, I went to Sunday school with your parents, and sent her greetings and was very friendly. And so I'm planning to go back and visit her. Probably next Sunday I'll go visit her and take her some Bible information. But she, I don't know if she believed or not back then. I haven't talked to her enough yet, but she had very good memories of going to Sunday school with my parents years and years ago. And she said she'd moved to another area, but her sister lives there. And so anyway, now I know how to be in touch with that lady. So our responsibility is to sow the seed. Next slide. And then he continued directly in Mark into the next parable. And he was saying to them, a lamp is not bought to be put under a basket or under a bed. It is bought to be put on a lampstand. So I don't think there's an explanation of this, but I think the explanation is obvious to us. You know, Christ is the light, and we're to let people see the light that we have in us and not hide it away. So, no, I don't think this parable required any explanation in the scripture, but through the perception that Christ gives us, it's clear. Next slide. So, getting to the work in Guatemala, for many years, I think in the 70s, my parents started having radio programs on a station there, and we've continued those. There's 20 hours a week of radio programs in the Quiché and Mam, which are two different Mayan languages, as well as in Spanish. This shows the announcer at the radio station where we pay for time. Next slide. At the radio station, I was able to set up a desk with literature, because a lot of people come and visit the radio station. I left some Gospels of John there in Quiché, and when I was out there this last time, there was a man who was also paying for time from a fairly remote area called Nahuala, where my parents worked. And showed him the Gospel of John, and he said, yeah, he meets with a group of men once a week, and took a Gospel of John for each of the men. He's from another church group, but hopefully they understand the Word and will benefit from the Gospel of John. The poster there showing the man reading the Bible, that advertises a Facebook page that I have that I use to promote the hymns and other Christian resources that I have available online. On the right-hand side, I'm standing between two ladies. The lady in the right is the one that asked me if she could take her picture with me and then sent me this picture. I'd given her this, I'd gone to an event where you could set up tables, and I set up a table with Christian literature, and I took a few of these children's Bible picture books with me that my parents had printed many years ago, and I still have some copies left. And I gave one to her, and she was just very excited to receive it, and then asked for the picture, and then later on she sent me a copy of the picture and told me why she was so happy about it. She said when she was a 5-year-old girl, a lady had read this book to her in Quiché, and that she came to the Lord through that, and that was her Bible at that time, she said. And she said she'd been looking for this book and never found it, because I had the only copies of it in the Quiché. And she lives probably 4 or 5 hours away from where my parents lived. I don't know how the book got out there, but anyway, to me, it's just another example of how the Lord sows the seed. Next slide. The picture on the top right is actually the family of the guy I was talking about that took the Emmaus courses. When I was about 7 years old, my parents used to go to the home of that elderly lady that's shown there, and they'd show slides and play a tape in Quiché with the gospel message. They were a Catholic family, but they welcomed us into their home, and I remember from way back when. And I'm standing to her right is her son, who moved to California several years ago, and in the background on the right is his teenage kids who go to high school in California, and to me it was totally amazing. I talked to them in English, and they just had perfect English. It was kind of surreal. The lady in the middle I met through walking the final few miles to church, and she told me her mother was one of my dad's patients. No, her mother-in-law was one of my dad's patients at the clinics that he had, and mother-in-law didn't want her picture taken, but the daughter-in-law was willing. And then the girl on the right also lives quite a ways away. I had a little contest, like a drawing online through my Facebook page for either the King of Glory books or this children's book in Quiche, and she was one of the winners of that drawing. So I sent her that book along with some other resources, and she sent me her picture back. So hopefully she'll put them to good use. Next slide. I work a lot with schools, providing educational resources in a digital format that can be accessed through Wi-Fi, both educational materials but also Bible-related materials, and so that gives an open door in a lot of public schools. The one I've probably worked with the most is the Salitre del Conejo School, this was their opening day of school a few years ago. In the middle is the Wi-Fi, the web server with the Wi-Fi antenna. On the right is the antenna that is installed at the school that people in the neighborhood can access. I'm currently working with 6 schools. Next slide. These pictures are from a school close to where my parents worked and where I meet on Sunday. I know about 6 of the teachers at that school, and one of my former co-workers up in College Station at the technology development company I was on, he said he'd like to help the work and has given donations several times to buy small web servers and so I used that school as his project because he was looking for a specific project to sponsor, so he's been sponsoring this school. Next slide. This is 2 other public schools. These schools, I'm working with a group of young people, helping a group of young people that do tutoring in schools on Saturdays, and they go to the Xolahap and Pueblo Viejo schools, which are both public schools. On the left, they all gathered outside to have a short prayer time before they went to their individual classes to work with tablets and the resources. On the right is the Pueblo Viejo school, and these 2 girls are teenagers, but I remember about 5 or 6 years ago they were the young kids being tutored, and it was just a joy to see them carrying on, volunteering their time to help the younger kids. Next slide. San Bartolo is it's a Christian school that's just being started by a fellow who he moved his family to the United States during the time of the war in the 1980s, and he taught in public schools in Colorado for a time, and then actually came down to Houston and was involved with the Hispanic group at Grace Presbyterian Church off the Beltway, and they helped him build this school, and I've helped him with I'm helping him with technology for the school. I installed the server with the first antenna in the town, and then there's a repeater at the school. They don't have power there, so it's battery powered. He just takes it there as he uses it. But nearby, there's a house where I have a second repeater antenna. They have power all the time, and there's 2 small stores near that, so people can come buy things at the stores and access the educational and Christian material online. A lot of people have phones, but they have very limited data, so this is a way to for them to access the information without using their data by getting close to the antennas. Right close to where I installed the server with the main antenna, there's a public school. I have right in front, and it's within range of the antenna. So when I go back, I plan to visit that public school and let them know what's available and meet with them, and hopefully they'll be receptive to that. Most of the time they are. It's really amazing how receptive the schools are to the Christian material along with the educational material. They said that is really good for the children to have a moral background and have some Bible-related things. So there's a real openness to the Bible, and it's viewed as a positive thing in most of the schools in Guatemala, which is encouraging. Next slide. And along with that, we're developing a platform to help the teachers organize their material. I view the teachers as a really positive thing because a lot of the teachers are not, I don't know if a lot, but yeah, quite a few of the teachers are believers, at least nominal believers, and I feel like by interacting with the teachers and encouraging the teachers, they can have a lot more influence they can have influence on more kids than I can personally. So I really see a lot of opportunities with the teachers. The fellow on the right, he was a student he was doing his master's in information technology and needed a thesis project, so he took on the educational platform as his thesis. He completed that and is now graduated. His advisor said that it was the most complete, most impactful project that any of the students had ever done in the information technology program. It was encouraging to hear him say that. So he's graduated, and myself, along with a contact who's with another mission organization, we jointly fund his development of the educational platform. He lives in a town called Panajachel, which is right by Lake Atitlan, which is a very famous tourist attraction in Guatemala. His father is a tour operator, has a tour bus and rents it out, and that's how his family makes a living. But anyway, he's a very skilled programmer and just a great guy to work with. His name is Wilson. Next slide. So, of course, meeting with believers. This is the Chan family. Some of you have heard of H.C. Chan, who worked with my parents for many years and did a lot of the preaching. He passed away a couple of years ago, but his brother Martin and the daughters, I meet with them on Sundays. And with accordion is Constantino. He's the fellow I was telling you about who opened the Christian school. I believe the Lord had our paths cross. It was about 5 or 6 years ago. I guess 6 or 7 years ago. It's before I moved back to Guatemala, but I was going to Guatemala a couple times a year to visit. And I was got on the bus from Guatemala City to go to Quetzaltenango, where I live. It's about a 4-hour bus drive. And he was sitting nearby and started talking to me, and found out we knew some people in common, and he told me about his vision to open this Christian school. And about 6 months later, I went back to Guatemala, got on the bus, and there he was. I had another conversation, and anyway, we got back in touch several months ago, and it was nice to see that he's finally was able to see his vision of the school open. So, and he's been meeting with us on Sundays as well. He goes to the rural area where his family is originally from during the week, and has a house in the city as well. Has been coming back on the cities on Sundays and wasn't really involved with the church in the city, so I invited him to come. He loves the hymns in Quiche and is musically talented. So anyway, I've really treasuring the friendship I'm developing with him. 2 Corinthians 4:7-9 says, But we have this treasure in jars of clay to show this all surpassing power is from God and not from us. We are hard pressed on every side, but not crushed, perplexed, but not in despair, persecuted, but not abandoned, struck down, but not destroyed. Really, it's a joy for me to be back here. I consider you all to be treasures in jars of clay as well. That's, we're all treasures through what Christ has done for us. We have challenges, but the Lord protects us and uses us and keeps us safe. Next slide. Prayer requests. First of all, that the radio programs and literature will lead many to have a deeper understanding of God's Word. There's a lot of nominal Christians in Guatemala, but really need for better understanding of God's Word. And for the contacts at the schools, I can encourage the teachers and make effective use of the educational and the Christian content, not just for the students, but also for the families. And that the believers will grow in their faith and be exercised about inviting others to the fellowship. And that we will let the light we have from Christ be visible and obvious to those who are around us. Also for the new presidential administration, which is actually starting today at 2 p.m. is the inauguration. It was a very contentious election, a lot of question whether the new president could take power, and a lot of questions remain about what changes are going to happen, because it's going to be a very big change. Potentially, there's been a lot of accusations of corruption from the last administrations. They've been fairly right-leaning administrations, but with a lot of corruption. Now this is a very populist president who says he's against corruption. He's going to help the poor people, he says. He's promised a lot, and how that's going to work in practice is pretty unknown, but at least there's been a peaceful transfer of power. There wasn't a coup, as some people felt there might be, but hopefully things will continue open for the gospel, and hopefully there won't be a lot of class warfare through this. But anyway, if you pray for Guatemala. Next slide. So the Father has given us light to share with others. Matthew 5:16 says, "Let your light shine before men in such a way that they may see your good works and glorify your Father who is in heaven." So may the Lord help us all to let our light shine. I think that's the last slide, is it, brother?